Hi, I'm Professor Alexander, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 7, which is Sexuality in Adulthood. We're going to go ahead and get started. Now, remember, there may be times where you got to pause the video to take notes, or when we have a graph or any type of chart, feel free to just press pause so you can fully absorb the information that's being presented to you. Now, remember, as I'm speaking, you are writing notes. You're taking notes in order to retain the information for tests. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, sexuality in adulthood. The main topics are sexuality in early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood. Just like other life passages, the one from adolescence to early adulthood offers potential for growth if one is aware of and remains open to the opportunities of each stage that life brings. Now, this particular chapter is really heavy with content, so you want to be taking notes as I go along, right? When we talk about sexuality in early adulthood, we are referring to the developmental stages. Several tasks challenge young adults as they develop their sexuality. So this can consist of establishing sexual orientation. Children and adolescents may engage in sexual experimentation, such as playing doctor, kissing, and fondling with members of both sexes. This is not a surprise. From early childhood all the way on up, but they do not necessarily associate these activities with sexual orientation. It's just merely experimentation, playing around. Instead, their orientation as heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender is in the process of emerging. They haven't figured that out yet. So integrating love and sex, right? When we talk about traditional gender roles, they call for men to be sex-oriented and women to be love-oriented. These are stigmas. These are stereotypes put on us. These are social constructs. In adulthood, this sex versus love conflict needs to be addressed early on. So instead of polarizing love and sex, people need to develop ways of uniting them, right? So in terms of forging intimacy and making commitments, young adulthood is characterized by increasing that sexual experience. This typically happens in college through dating, courtship, cohabitation, as living together. Individuals gain knowledge of themselves and others as potential partners. As relationships become more meaningful, the degree of intimacy and interdependence increases. Sexuality can be a means of enhancing intimacy and self-disclosure, as well as a source of physical pleasure. So as adults become more intimate, most desire to develop their ability to make commitments. Now, when we refer to making childbearing decisions or becoming a parent, it's socially discouraged during adolescence, right? That we have a show on MTV, a 16-year-old parent, but it becomes increasingly legitimate when people reach their 20s, especially if they are married. And some parents force that on their kids. This is an expectation that you should have a child by a certain age, right? Depending on your culture. Fertility issues are often critical but unacknowledged, especially for single young adults. So practicing safer sex to protect against sexually transmitted infections, which we typically refer to as STIs, and awareness of various STIs and ways to best protect against them must be integrated into the communication, values, and behaviors of all young adults. So evolving a sexual philosophy. As individuals move from adolescence to adulthood, they reevaluate these moral standards, moving from moral decision making based on authority to standards based on their personal principle, individuality, the right and wrong, the caring, the responsibility. They become responsible, folks become responsible for developing their own moral code, which includes the sexual issues that they're working through. In doing so, we need to evolve a personal philosophical perspective to give coherence to sexual attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, and values. They need to place sexuality within the larger framework of our own lives and relationships. Our need to integrate their personal religious spirituality and humanistic values with our own sexuality. So this right here is a chart that demonstrates a sexual and reproductive timeline, the mean age of major events, with the women being on the left and the men being on the right side. Menarche refers to when a woman starts menstruation. The average age is 12.3 years old, right? Where the average young man is able to produce sperm at the age of 14. First sexual intercourse for a woman is 17.8. This is an average, right? This doesn't dictate the onset of sex for all people. This is just an average for women and for men. 17.8 for women, 18.1 for men. First serious relationship, 22.4 for women, 23.7 for men. First marriage, first birth, 26.5, 27 for women. For men, 29.8, 29.5 for men, right? So when we talk about establishing sexual orientation, a critical task of adulthood is establishing one's sexual orientation as either heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. We also have asexual, we got polyamorous, we have a lot of different terms. We got pansexual, right? That's the ability to love freely, no matter of one's sexual orientation. But in late adolescence and young adulthood, men and women are confronted with the important developmental task of establishing intimacy. And part of that task of establishing an intimate relationship is solidifying one's sexual orientation. Most people develop a heterosexual identity by adolescence or young adulthood, right? So you pretty much know what your sexual identity is before adulthood, young adulthood. Our task is simplified because development as heterosexual is approved by society, culture, neighborhoods, family. But for those who are attracted to the same or both sexes are still unsure, their development features more doubt and anxiety. Because those who are attracted to the same sex are aware that they are violating deep societal taboos, it can take them longer to confirm and accept their sexual orientation. It may also be difficult and dangerous for them to establish a relationship. So, until the research of Alfred Kinsey and his colleagues, sexual orientation was broken down into heterosexual and homosexual. We call this a dichotomy, too, right? Like black and white. Now, we know that this is false because there are lots of areas of shaded gray. There's so many more categories than heterosexual or homosexual. There's a lot more to life than just black and white. We could all agree on that. That is, a person could be one or the other. This is ridiculous, right? So what the figure was showing, some researchers considered a third category was bisexuality. Although others believe that bisexual individuals was a homosexual person trying to be heterosexual, which is false, research by Dr. Kinsey and his team and others showed that homosexuality was not uncommon and that engaging in same-sex behaviors did not necessarily make a person homosexual. They also found that participation in both same and other sex behavior was not uncommon. This led folks to conclude that sexual orientation is on a continuum, like I described in the previous chapter, from exclusively heterosexual to exclusively homosexual, right? And that a person's sexual behavior pattern could change across a lifetime. Since that time, this continuum has been widely utilized in sexual research, education, and therapy. Now, this particular graph is a breakdown. This is the 3 model of sexual orientation that we were referring to in that previous slide, where at first they view bisexual as a dichotomous, psychoanalytic, either heterosexual, homosexual, combination of both will be bisexual, right? Then we have the continuum, right? From a 0 being exclusively heterosexual, you fall anywhere between those lines all the way up to 6 being exclusively homosexual. But model B is the unidimensional bipolar, right? And Kinsey refers to. Now we have from high to low homoeroticism, homosexual and bisexual being high to low. Okay. On the low end is asexual and heterosexual. That's 2-dimensional versus what we see as what we know as the continuum, right? So now we're talking about sexuality in early adulthood. Now, the exact numbers of men and women who identified as hetero, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender is unknown, simply because a lot of folks do not indicate what they particularly are because of how society views them, right? So it's misleading. Some people lie, some people don't take the surveys at all, right? And when you have the opportunity to take the survey, sometimes depending on your culture, your partner, these social constructs, people are not forthcoming. So individuals, the stats on sexual orientation, we'll never fully know. We can kind of get a gauge on that. We can get close, but it's not always exact. So individuals are reluctant to reveal their sexual identities for a number of reasons, but the main two tend to be personal hesitancy and conceptual problems. So the majority of students on the prevalence of people's variations in sexual orientation suggests about 1 to 4% of males and females consider themselves to be something other than heterosexual. About 10 to 15% report at least occasional sexual attraction to or a sexual fantasy about the same sex. Now, when we talk about the gay, lesbian, bisexual identity process, identifying oneself as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, this takes a considerable amount of time, and for some, involve multiple ways of doing it, right? There's no just one way to come out. The most intense phase in the development of one's sexual identity is during late adolescence and early adulthood, where college grads are more likely to identify themselves as gay, lesbian, or bisexual while they are attending school, while they're in college. Because college education tends to engage students with issues of diversity, of you develop confidence in college, and it's a self-evaluation process that happens in college, right? You're exploring, you're building up your confidence. Folks are around you that are diverse. So this leads to folks having the ability to express and identify easier. We use this term homoeroticism. Homoeroticism is feelings of sexual attraction to members of the same sex. Almost always precedes lesbian or gay activity by several years, right? So tools like the sexual orientation identity uncertainty scale can provide one with a greater awareness and acceptance of sexual identity. So the self-labeling or self-identification as a heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual person. For some, the awareness of being or feeling something other than heterosexual occurs in phases. The first phase is marked by the initiation of a process of self-discovery and exploration, including becoming aware of one's sexual orientation, questioning whether one may be lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans person, and having sex with members of the same sex. So because of fear, reprisal, dismissal, public reaction, many gay, lesbian, and bisexual professionals are not out to their employers, coworkers, or in the public. While men appear more likely to regard their sexual orientation as fixed and innate, women are more likely to acknowledge choice and change, right? Depending on the circumstances. Like there's a decision to make where there really isn't a decision to make. There isn't a choice. But many gay men and lesbian women experience some of the same negative attitudes towards homosexuality as their heterosexual counterparts. Why? Because internalized homophobia is a set of negative attitudes and effects towards homosexuality in other persons and towards same-sex attraction in oneself. So growing up in a heterosexual world that condones only one way of sexual expression and reproduction, many gay men and lesbian women learn to believe that heterosexuality is the only option and that homosexuality is a perversion. They feel like they're different. They feel like how they feel inward should be shunned. And folks have a right to do that when they shouldn't feel that way. It's just what society puts on them. So such self-hatred can significantly impede the self-acceptance process that many gay men and lesbian women go through. In order to come out and embrace their sexuality, that's a tall task because you're facing opposition from your community, your culture, your workplace. sometimes school, right? And sometimes it takes many individuals time to overcome that. So when we talk about the new social context of singlehood, right? In recent decades, there's been a staggering increase in the numbers of unmarried adults, right? And what we talk about, what we refer to as unmarried, is never married, divorced, or widowed. Most of this increase has been the result of men and women, especially young adults, marrying later in life, taking a little bit more time to decide on whether or not marriage is for them, and also whether or not to marry the right person. The outcomes of this dramatic increase in unmarried young adults include the following: greater sexual experiences. Men and women who marry later are more likely to have more sexual experience. This isn't like back in the day, right? Now I'm talking about the 1970s and before, 1960s, 1950s. Folks are spending more time. This typically leads to greater sexual experience, more sex partners than earlier generations. Non-marital sex has become the norm among many adults. We got Tinder, Grindr, Plenty of Fish. People meet on Facebook. People meet on Instagram. Increased number of singles or those who have never married or divorced or are widowed. There are a lot of factors that contribute to this, like being financially stable. Financial instability is a number one reason, but societal acceptance, right? How our culture, how our family views us, and personal preference is a big one, right? You want to marry the right person. You want to marry somebody that's financially stable, or your community or your family will be accepting of. So this takes time. Widespread acceptance of cohabitation means living together, right? So as young adults are deferring marriage until later, they're putting it off. Living together is seen as a viable living arrangement, where back in the day, I'm talking about precluding 1970s, this was frowned upon in many societies. It has also become an integral part of the young adult life, right? There's other factors too, like unintended pregnancies. You get your partner pregnant or you become pregnant. Because greater numbers of women are single and sexually active, they are more likely to become unintentionally pregnant as a result of unprotected sexual intercourse or contraceptive failure. So increased numbers of abortion and births to single women. The increased number of unintended pregnancies has led to more abortions and births to single moms. Birth among unmarried couples now rivals birth to married ones as a pathway by which children enter family structures, right? There's no right or wrong way to come into this world, but these are some of the differences that are occurring in the new millennium, right? So greater numbers of separated and divorced men and women because of their previous marital experience. Separated and divorced men and women tend to have different expectations about relationships than never married young adults. Nearly half of all marriages are now remarriages for at least one partner. So that means that folks have been married before. This isn't their first rodeo when they get married again. So a rise in the number of single parent families. Today, it's roughly at 28% of all single parents, mostly moms, are living with their children. And this information comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. This was taken in 2014. So the world that unmarried young adults live in is one in which greater opportunities than ever before exist for exploring intimate relationships. That's the reality that we're living in. So the college environment. When we talk about the college environment, many of you who are taking my class, you are all college students. So the college environment is important not only for intellectual development, but also for social development. There's a social aspect in college, right? We have to go to classes. There's dormitories and frats, fraternities and sororities, parties, clubs. You might meet a sexual partner at an athletic event. This provides opportunities. This provides lots of opportunities for meeting others is in school. So for many, college is a place to search for and find mates. Dating in college is similar to high school, with dating in many ways. It may be formal or informal, getting together, the hooking up. It may be a recreation or for finding a mate, but it features the features that distinguish college dating from high school dating include there's more independence, right? You're away from home sometimes. There's no parental influence. Your parents are not around. The increased maturity of partners. You're a little bit older than high school. You have more flexibility in your time and your schedule. And the increased opportunities for sexual interactions tend to happen more so in college than in high school. So for most college students, love and dating become different during emerging adulthood, with more focus on sexuality as it relates to developing one's own identity, right? You're developing your own sexual identity. So although acceptance of sex outside of marriage is widespread in college, there are more boundaries placed on women. So if a woman has sexual intercourse, most people believe it should take place in the context of a relationship. Women who sleep around are often morally censored, reflecting the continued sexual double standard that we have with men and women. Are not usually condemned as harshly as women for having sex without a commitment. So college campuses often have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender organizations that sponsor social events and get-togethers, right? Like we have in San Jose, we have the program Youth Space, which I've had them as a guest speaker, right? So and that they provide the opportunity for get-togethers as well as mental health, working with folks that might have mental health issues. So individuals freely meet others in open situations, and meaningful relationships develop and mature out of these. But also there's a prejudice against those who are different that is pervasive in college and university. So college life has been an important haven for all different kinds of communities. So when we continue conversation around the college environment, we talk about the 4 moral standards of non-marital sexuality among college students. So although acceptance of sex outside of marriage is still widespread among college students, there are more boundaries placed on women. If a woman has sexual intercourse, most people frown down upon. So that we call that the double standard, right? So as I said before, college campuses still have, most college campuses will have some sort of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender club or organization, right? So it's often a liberating environment for transgender students because this is their opportunity to feel heard, to feel valued, because they have a support system because of so much diversity that happens in college. So the singles world, right? There are more people, as I said in the previous slides, there are more single folks than ever before, because in recent decades, the staggering increase in numbers of unmarried adults that's never being married, right? We still talk about the increase in singlehood in this day and age. The outcomes tend to affect greater sexual experience and an increased number of single, those who are never married. Those factors that contribute to that are going to be financial stability, societal acceptance, right? The most frequent means of meeting others is going to be still being introduced by friends. Now we have the internet, right? So we have Facebook, we have Instagram, Grindr, Tinder, Match.com, right? We used to have Craigslist when people met on Craigslist. We have Facebook. We have all these various dating websites that somebody can choose from, where we didn't have that before. So even if a shy individual doesn't want to meet somebody at a party, they could just hop online and meet somebody, and they could filter their comments. You have time to think about what you're going to say as opposed to being put on the spot. Also, people still meet in social and religious groups. So these things are pervasive in this day and age, right? So this all has to do with that college environment / early adulthood. Now, cohabitation. This is the practice of living together and having a sexual relationship. It's increasingly accepted at almost every level now. In fact, cohabitation is now a typical pathway into marriage, such that about 2/3 of women married in the past decade cohabitated with their partners prior to marriage. The concept of domestic partnership has led to laws granting some of the protections of marriage to men and women, including gay men and lesbian women who cohabitate in committed relationships. So cohabitation has become more widespread and accepted in recent years for several reasons. The general climate regarding sexuality is more open-minded than it was a generation ago. We're more open-minded than ever now. Sexuality is more widely considered to be an important part of people's lives, whether or not they're married. So the moral criteria for judging sexual intercourse is shifted from my parents' generation. A committed relationship or love rather than marriage is now widely regarded as making sex with another person. This is becoming more moral. Divorce is now seen as more preferable than an unhappy marriage. Right now more than ever, people are deciding to divorce and get out of an unhappy marriage, where in my parents' generation, they just tried to suffer through it and make it work. So because of the dramatic increase in divorce rates in the recent years, marriage is no longer thought of as necessarily a permanent commitment. Permanence is increasingly replaced by serial monogamy. Serial monogamy is a succession of marriages or relationships, whereby the average marriage now lasts about 7 years. So young adults are continuing to defer marriage at the same time they want the companionship found in living intimately with another person. So the developmental concerns in middle adulthood is folks have to redefine sex in a marital or other long-term relationships. So in new relationships, sex is often passionate and intense. It may be the central focus, right? But in long-term marital or cohabitating relationships, the habit of competing family and work obligations, being tired, coming from work, unresolved conflicts, arguing all the time, often erode the passionate intensity associated with sex. So sex may need to be redefined as more of an expression of intimacy and caring. Individuals may also need to decide how to deal with the possibility, reality, and meaning of extramarital or extra relational sex. Extra relational sex is having sex outside of the committed relationship. And what tends to happen is reevaluating one's own sexuality. So single women and single men, they may need to weigh the costs and benefits of sex in a casual or a lightly committed relationship. But in long-term relationships, sexuality often becomes less than the central focus to relationship satisfaction, as non-sexual elements such as communication, intimacy, shared interests and values and activities become more important than sex, especially when you're raising children, right? You typically have to focus on what's happening inside of the family. So women who desire children and who have deferred the childbearing part of the relationship begin to reapprise their decision. They begin to reevaluate their decision. Should they remain child-free, right? Should they just be carefree, child-free? Are they getting older in age? Is there a race against their biological clock? Is their biological clock ticking, informing them that this might be my last opportunity? I'm approaching the finish line in terms of my ability to have a healthy child, right? That's what we refer to as your biological clock. Or should I adopt a child, right? These are options. These are things that folks that are cohabitating, folks that are married, they have to weigh out, especially as you approach middle adulthood. So some people still define their sexual orientation, but at the same time, their sexual philosophy continues to change, right? Because as you get more information, you become more mature, you become more advanced in life. Sometimes your opinions change. That's just the reality. So accepting the biological aging process, right? As people age, now we start to have gray hairs, our skin wrinkles, our skin begins to sag, right? Our hair starts to fall out. If you are a middle-aged man, your vision might blur, and now you need glasses. And to society, right? We've been programmed, these social constructs. You might view yourself as less attractive, less appealing, and others may too. So by 40, your physiological responses have begun to slow down. So by 50s, society begins to almost shun folks, right? Especially women who have gone through menopause. The challenge of aging is to come to terms with all the biological changes and challenges, right? My grandfather used to say getting old is not for the weak in terms of how you feel about yourself and in terms of how society views you. So sexuality in middle adulthood, when we talk about how sexuality is established in relationship, sexual intercourse, that might diminish in frequency the longer a couple is married. So for newly married couples, the average frequency of sexual intercourse is about 3 times a week. But as couples get older, the frequency drops. Decreased frequency, however, does not necessarily mean that sex is no longer important or that the partnership is not valid or is not satisfactory to one of the individuals in that partnership. It may still be a result of just the biological aging and the declining sexual drive that both partners are experiencing, or it could be just the way our brains adapt from that initial surge, that dopamine that's being produced that prompts romance and the desire to the relative quiet, right? So when we say oxytocin induced attachment, oxytocin is a hormone that produces a feeling of connectedness and bonding. But decreasing frequency of sexual interaction may, for example, simply mean that one or both parties are just too tired, right? Now we're talking about folks that have to contribute to the household. Now in California, oftentimes you need a dual worker family where both people are working. And now we throw families in the mix. Now we have stress. We got financial issues. We have worries, family and societal worries about paying mortgage and bills. One of the individuals in the partnership may not have any private time, right? These are all the significant factors that contribute to the decline in the frequency of sex, right? But there are still some ways to spice that up, like having regular date nights, right? Date days, date nights, traveling, right? Planning out time for the couple. Now, I don't want to be the one to, diminish of what sexuality or what marriage looks like in middle adulthood. But these are just some of the factors that I'm introducing that can contribute to it. There are a myriad of ways of spicing up the sex life in adulthood, taking walks, vacationing, plan time, just couple time, right? To plan time with the family, and then also plan time alone, just with your partner. So most married couples don't seem to feel that decline in frequency in sex intercourse is a major problem. Overall, they think that the relationship is good. Why? Because sometimes as you get older, many people feel like they require less sex. So sexual intercourse, that's just one of the erotic bonds in a partnership. There's also kissing, caressing, nibbling on each other's ears, right? Massaging, candlelit dinners, refer to walking hand in hand in the park, intimate conversations, so on and so forth. There are so many ways to spice it up. Higher levels of sexual satisfaction and pleasure seem to be found in marriage than in singlehood or extramarital relationships. For the simple fact is, over time, you get to know your partner a little bit better. So the lowest rates of satisfaction were among those who are neither married nor living with someone. A group thought to have sex most frequently tends to be those that are in committed relationships. Now we have to talk about divorce. Okay. So divorce. This is a major factor in Western life, in American life. So a quick observation, when I look at the demographics in the country, this points to a growing way of life. So post-divorce or singlehood, that deals with how folks are adapting. Being married is very different than being divorced. So the divorce trends in the 20th century and recent decades, the divorce rate has actually dropped. Some people think it's risen, but it's actually dropped. So a lot of scholars in this field, a lot of human sexuality researchers, they suggest that divorce represents not a devaluation or looking down on marriage, but oddly enough, it is a willingness to want to be single, right? After going through marriage. So we would not divorce if we did not have such high expectations for marriage's ability to fulfill a personal needs, various needs. So divorce rate tells us that we may no longer believe that marriage needs to be permanent. Instead, we think that marriage only as long as the marriage is rewarding, right? You're getting something from it, right? Or until a potentially better partner comes along. Now, because divorce is so prevalent, many studies have focused on its effects on partners and children. So, from these studies, a number of consequences of divorce have been identified as follows. There is a stigma by family and friends and coworkers. There's a change in income because now you're losing your partner that was contributing to the household, right? It is typically a huge decline for women and their kids when the divorce rate happens, especially if the husband in that marriage is, the quote unquote breadwinner for that family, right? There's a higher incident of some type of physical, emotional abuse, social problems among both men and women. Sometimes it can lead to depression, injury, illness. There are significantly more problems with children, including some of those children that are a result of divorce. It can lead to criminal behavior. It can also they have a higher rate of substance abuse, right? As drugs and alcohol, lower academic performance, right? Earlier sexual activity as children who are a product of a divorce are acting out. There may be a higher rate of divorce for their particular marriage as they get older. And the children are twice as likely as those in a two-parent family household to develop some type of psychiatric problem and addiction later in life, right? These are just statistics. It doesn't happen like this for everybody, but many individuals report being less close to their parents. And if they marry, are more likely to get divorced than people that are coming from a two-parent family, a two-parent household. Right. So when we talk about dating again after the divorce, this is an exciting time for those recently divorced, but it also triggers some nervousness and sometimes awkwardness. It's that getting back on the horse after have not been on a horse for so long, right? The online dating sites, how do you navigate the Tinders, right? Swipe left, swipe right, right? How do you get on Match.com or eHarmony? Is there a stigma about being recognized or being noticed by somebody from your community or somebody that you work with, right? Online dating is also removed geographical limitations because now if you're in the Bay Area, you can meet somebody that is outside of the Bay Area but close, not too far away. If you live in San Jose, you can meet somebody in Oakland, right? Improve chances of meeting like-minded people because websites like eHarmony and Match.com, they fancy themselves, they brag on having the ability to match up folks based on your personality. Even Plenty of Fish, which is a free online dating website. So when we talk about single parenting after adulthood, the demographic trends have affected the trend towards single parenthood, right? Good. So when we talk about sexuality in late adulthood, some folks think that this doesn't exist, but there's still a lot of biological changes. So older men and women, physical abilities, they change with age. We know this, right? Their sexual responses change as well. So if we take a 70-year-old person, though they might still be sexual, it's not sexual in the same manner as an 18-year-old. That's the reality. As men and women continue to age, their sexuality tends to be more uncommon, and it's less genital to genital oriented, right? And it's less consistent, right? They do more foreplay. They tend to do more walks in the park. It could be more verbal. It's more what's considered intimacy invoked, right? So chronic illness can take place, hormonal changes, right? The increasing frailty, right? Where bones are becoming weaker. And this all results in diminished sexual activity. So all of these considerations have to take place, and they all contribute to the ongoing evolution of the individual sexual philosophy, right? When we talk about the death of a partner when you're in a marriage, one of the most critical life events is the loss of a partner. So after the age 60, there is a significant increase in spousal deaths because having a partner is the most important factor determining an older person's sexual interactions. So now we have the removal of that partner through death. through age. Death is one of the things that's promised to happen to everyone in life. So that absence of that sexual partner, that signifies a huge shift, a change in the survivor's sexual interactions, right? Because you have somebody you've been dealing with for years is now gone. Also, the things that we have to consider in late adulthood are the psychological influence. So given the US's obsession with youth and beauty and sexuality, it's not really surprising that many people consider it inappropriate for older men and women to continue to be sexually active. But the fact of the matter that older men and women, they are sexually active, but many of us don't think about it this way, right? So such factors as lack of sexual information, negative attitudes towards sexual expression, and mental health issues, including depression, along with all these treatments that we have a remedy for, these might still interfere with older individuals' ability or willingness to see themselves as sexual beings. Older adults negotiate these issues within the context of continuing aging. They also, as they go throughout a lifespan, resolving them as we age, it helps those to accept the eventuality of death. Death is promised. Not to be morbid, but everybody is going to live and everybody is going to experience death. So having the ability to know that that's coming as you get older is a mature thing to do. All right. How do you prepare for life after? So stereotypes of aging. Our societal stereotypes, aging is a lonely, depressing time. But most of the studies that I've seen, older adults find that relatively young people, they still express high levels of satisfaction and well-being. It is poverty, the loneliness, poor health that make old age difficult. The sexuality of older Americans tends to be invisible. And as society discounts their sexuality, several factors account for this in our particular culture in the US. We associate sexuality with young people, assuming that sexual attraction exists only between those with younger bodies, youthful bodies. Interest in sex is considered normal in 25-year-old men, but in the 75-year-old man, it is considered creepy, right? We don't think about it that way, but 75-year-old men, they still have sexual desires. So we still stereotype and associate the idea of romance and love with the young. Many of us, we still find it hard to believe that older adults fall in love and their love can be intense as younger people, if not more. And we continue to associate procreation with sex. So we measure a woman's worth, a woman's femininity by her childbearing and maternal role, and a man's masculinity by the children that he has. Right? These are misnomers. These are social constructs. My job is to tear down misnomers and our stereotypical way of thinking. And hopefully I've done that so far throughout the course. Older people do not have sexual desires as strong as those younger people. This is a misnomer, right? Intimacy is especially valued and important for an older person's well-being, just as it is for younger folks. So, the aging gay man, right? The aging gay and lesbian woman, they face that double stigma. Stigmas related to the sexual orientation and to their age, right? Which makes them undesirable to most. And this ostracizing, they marginalize folks that are older and gay. But just like the stigmas of aging for all Americans, these reflect the myths rather than the reality. That's the important thing. These reflect myths, stereotypes, rather than reality. I'll say that again. So targeted, when we educate folks on programs, it can still help reduce some of the fears, the discomfort related to both aging and sexual orientation. Now when we talk about sexuality and aging, the qualities that comprise a happy sexual relationship, there are a number of factors. A sexual partner, but not necessarily a spouse. You don't necessarily need to marry to have a happy sexual relationship, okay? Frequent sexual intercourse, that's more than once a week, but not necessarily daily. It doesn't have to happen every single day, right? Good health, okay? So that's for the self and for the partner. Low levels of stress, Absence of financial worries. These are all qualities that compromise a happy sexual relationship. Now, when we refer to women's issues, beginning sometime in their 40s, right? Most women start to experience a normal biological process resulting in the decline of fertility, right? That's your ability to bear children. Many women are relieved when they no longer have to worry about getting pregnant, and pleased when they no longer have to deal with monthly menstrual flow. This period of gradual change and adjustment is referred to as perimenopause. Now, during this time, the ovaries, which are responsible for childbearing, produce less and less estrogen and progesterone, and ovulation becomes less regular. These are facts. So over a few years, menstrual periods become irregular, meaning they're infrequent. They don't happen all the time, and then they eventually stop. Most women rejoice when this menstruation stops. So usually between the ages of 45 and 55, I'm thinking about when it happened for my mom. She definitely had a period of time where she had what's called hot flashes and things of that nature. And I didn't quite understand it then, but I understand now what she was going through. But it can happen anytime from the 30s to the mid 50s or later. 30s is super early for perimenopause to happen, but it has happened as early as the 30s. So the average age for menopause, and this is the complete stop of menstruation for at least 1 year, is 51, right? So a woman can also undergo menopause as a result of a surgery called a hysterectomy, and this is the surgical removal of the uterus. If both ovaries are also removed, depending on medical conditions, a hysterectomy might be called for, and also what might be called for is both ovaries are removed surgically. In postmenopausal, so women that have estrogen levels are about 1/10. This is an estimation, but they're about 1/10 of those in premenopausal women, and progesterone is nearly gone. It's nearly completely absent, right? So most women experience some type of physiological or psychological symptoms during menopause. So whether or not women go through menopause naturally or surgically, the symptoms can appear as a woman's body attempts to adjust to the drop in estrogen levels. The symptoms vary from one woman to the next. Some may breeze through menopause with few symptoms, right? Whereas others, they experience many discomforting symptoms for several months or even years. So the most common symptoms of menopause are the hot flashes that I referred to earlier that I remember my mom going through. Also, another symptom could be vaginal dryness, waking up in the middle of the night through sleep disturbances, right? Another symptom is thinning of the vaginal walls, and this could result in the length and the width of the vagina decreasing and the vagina not being able to expand during penile vaginal intercourse as it once did. So intercourse can now become painful. Bleeding can happen because of the vagina not expanding, right? And the vagina can be more susceptible to infection. So these effects may begin while a woman is still menstruating and may continue after menstruation has stopped. And a hot flash is what we call a period. It's a brief time where there's intense warmth, a flushing. Women perspire, they sweat. This typically lasts for about a minute or two, but it can range anywhere from 15 seconds to about an hour. Now, the hour is extreme and it's rare, but a hot flash occurs when the estrogen levels drop because the body has an internal thermostat, right? And the brain is the trigger to dilate the blood vessels near the skin surface. So when that ceases to take place, it produces a sensation of heat. So hot flashes that occur with severe sweating during sleep are called night sweats, right? So when a woman goes through this, she may dampen her pillow or the sheets or the cover because she's going through night sweats. So some women who are going through the menopause experience, they also have insomnia because it's hard to sleep when you're having a hot flash. It's hard to sleep when you're sweating, right? And these are connected to the hot flashes. And this is going to change the game up in terms of your sexual interests. Your sex, when a woman is having hot flashes, regular hot flashes, at night, her sexual interest starts to go down. It decreases, right? So there's also urination, hot flashes, and menopause affects urinating, peeing, right? Is not as consistent as it was. So there's a weakening of pelvic floor muscles. There's headaches. There may be weight gain. So some women also report depression, irritability, and other emotions come from menopause, perimenopausal to menopause. So these are all issues that we have to consider when we're thinking about aging and women and men, what they go through in terms of late adulthood. Wow. So we have covered so very much, right? So we learned about sexuality not only in early adulthood, but middle adulthood, all the way to late adulthood. We learned that the college environment or college life, university life is kind of how we cut our teeth intimacy wise, where we meet partners during our college life, right? We learned about what singlehood looks like. We learned about divorce, right? Some of us are products of divorce, right? It doesn't make you a lesser individual, but there may still be some underlying issues associated with divorce. So this chapter has been highly informative. Hopefully you learned. I know I did. Feel free to go ahead and rewind the video if you missed something, to look at the charts, or if you need to just get a refresher or to take notes, on a section that was unclear for you. I know when I used to look at YouTube lectures or anything of the sort, if there was an area that I was unclear, I would pause the video and I would get on Google and try my best to try to get that information locked into the mind for the test. Again, I'm Professor Alexander, right? This has been chapter 7. Now, feel free to review this in order to answer your homework questions, and be on the lookout for chapter 8.